You are a cultural pioneer, or as I'd like to say, a culture-neer. You're daring to go where others aren't willing to go. The unknown doesn't scare you, it intrigues you. You're not satisfied with the status quo. Business as usual is not in your DNA. You're done with doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You're an explorer at heart and a trendsetter by nature. You were born with purpose, called to lead, destined to make a difference. You are the Culture-neer.
Well, welcome to the Culture-neer podcast, where faith, leadership, and culture collide. I'm your host, Terry Gwaltney, and today I'm honored to have Bill High as our guest. His story embodies heritage, vision, legacy. He's an author, lawyer, consultant, husband, dad. I think more importantly, he's a follower of Jesus. Bill, welcome to the Culture-neer podcast.
Hey, great to be with you, Terry.
Yeah, I'm excited for the audience to learn about all the amazing things you're involved in and your new book, The Legacy Life. But if it's okay with you, can we just start and begin with like who you are, where you came from, and your journey? Because that's about as fascinating. Your history is about as fascinating as what you're doing today.
Yeah, people look at me here sometimes and they see, lots of times, if I'm wearing a sport jacket or a suit, and they're like, they don't know the full story because I grew up very poor. My dad was the oldest of 8, living in the hills of the Missouri Ozarks, 3-room log cabin. And the big objective was get out of there. And so he joined the service, met my mom in Japan when he was stationed there in Japan in 1956, brought her back to the States. Together they had 6 kids. I was 5th out of 6, but we were a welfare family. It was a very poor, I don't remember living in a house with a working toilet until I was like 16. So not many people can fully appreciate the kind of poverty that we grew up in. I remember opening up the refrigerator door sometimes and there was be nothing but a bowl of beans in there. God was gracious to us. So somebody planted a church in our small little town of 100 people. Would you think about that, Terry? How many people, what kind of ROI do you get on a church plant in a town of 100?
Yeah.
That's how I came to know Christ, and that changed everything. My dad died a couple years after that. I was 12, left my mom with 6 kids to raise. But it was really out of that experience, the father wound that so many people experience, that I started keeping a journal when I was about 13 years old. And one of my earliest entries was this entry about, man, I'd love to have a great family. And so that's really been the journey that I've been on for all these years, is this whole idea of family. And as you appreciate, what the culture of a family.
Golly, there's so much to unpack there, but I think that's so impactful because I think it's easy for us listening today to have this conversation with my wife this morning, and she was saying you want things to happen too quick, and sometimes you just need to be a little bit more patient. And it's very easy, I think, for some of us that are driven to pay too much attention to the numbers as the only barometer to the effectiveness of what God is doing in that moment. And, nobody listening today would even know the name of the pastor that went and planted that church of 100 people. But the impact and influence of his life is the reason that we're sitting here talking today. And you've talked to millions of people, obviously, at this point, and impacted their life. And golly, how powerful that is.
Yeah, that little church plan, it took me years to understand actually why somebody did that, but it was 3 families who moved from a suburban church to start this little church. And they labored hard and long. The church today, it's now just a little house that somebody lives in. If I showed you pictures, you're like, there's no way a church could have even been there. But it was an intern who came from the local seminary to preach on a Sunday, probably picked up $20 a week or something like that. But here we are today. And that's I think to your point, is we don't appreciate, in the book, The Legacy Life, we talk about this idea that legacy is not what you leave behind, but it's what you put in motion. What are the things that you are putting in motion through your life today? And that's the fruit that sometimes we don't see for generations to come.
Yeah, and living with that legacy, kingdom-minded lens. I think we default into these situations where we're way too situational, and God is thinking generational. We're making these decisions and trying to bring understanding to, well, why didn't God do this? And, why I should do this now, and weighing it all in this short season of 75, 80 years of our life. And there's so much generational things at stake because that's how God thinks. And I love, just because I just finished your book, and I've read quite a bit on legacy, but man, there was so much that was just bringing out and bringing clarity and amplifying. Because I think for a lot of us, we spend our lives chasing what somebody else has defined as success. And then we hope with no plan that the things that are the most important to us, or so we say, family, values, all those different things, are magically going to make it to the next generation. And in business, we have a value system that proves that, serves as the compass for organization. We have a vision of where we hope to end up and what it looks like when we get there, and a mission on how we're going to do it. But I was reading your book and found myself in the exact same spot. Like, I have all of that. I encourage people to do all that. But my family is far more important than my business, and yet I don't have that for my family. And so obviously have been motivated to begin that process. Can you talk about that a little bit? Why is that such a foreign concept when logically it makes so much sense?
Well, because we're sitting here on this podcast talking about Culture-neer, this idea, one of the things that we don't appreciate is that we've accepted a view of family culture, and it just happens. We don't even think about it because culture is one of those things that you just step into. And the culture of American family today, if you use the metaphor, is that we raise our family in a nest. We love them, protect them. We want to do all that we can. We want to put them in the best soccer teams and get them in the best schools. But then when they turn 18, we say, kick them out. Go off and do your thing. We say that's the raise them up to independence idea. But that's the Western culture, the Western view of family. It's an individualist view. But the biblical view of family is not raise them up to independence. The biblical view is that we raise them to interdependence. And that interdependence literally looks like this, is we're supposed to be a team. And that idea that we're raising people to be part of a family culture is not how we think about it here in the West. There are cultures around the world that are very driven by this idea of family as a team. Israel, is a what they call the family culture, the collectivist culture. Parts of Africa, Latin America, these are team-based kind of views. And so when you read the Bible, it's actually written from this family perspective. God said to Abraham, what? I'm going to use your family to bless the world. So land, people, and blessing. We may not see the full effect of that for generations to come. And that's a totally different view. Again, part of what happens, Terry, as you appreciate in the Western culture, the idea is that, man, I'm going to work really hard, save up, and be ready to retire so I can go sit on a beach somewhere and my kids will go off and do their own thing. That's not the biblical idea. Man, we're really called to raise teams to gather and advance God's kingdom and his dominion here on this earth.
Yeah, and I think we live with such a lack of kingdom view. Again, you go back to just our Western culture mindset. So many people are working to get to the period of time in their life where they have the most experience, the most wisdom, the most influence, the most resources to stop what they're doing, go play golf, just buy another house. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, but they move their life to a point where where they could be the most effective from a kingdom standpoint. And then almost like they put life on pause just to play.
Yeah.
Just totally miss what this thing's really all about.
A lot of people don't realize that one of the big shifts in family culture occurred in 1962. And 1960, by the way, the statistic is that 72% of families were two parents, kids gathered around the dinner table. In 1962, the Time Man of the Year was a guy named Del Webb. So if you've ever been to Florida, you've been to Phoenix, you know who Del Webb is. He's the guy that created retirement communities. And the whole idea is, if you're, at that place where you got enough, go retire to Florida or to Phoenix, get someplace warm. Well, what happens is you take the grandparents out of the family equation. And I say that what happens is you take the chief storytellers out of the family. And so then your kids, grandkids, they miss the connection to this divine narrative that God has been writing for generations. And it's no wonder that we have this whole generation of kids that have grown up and said that it's like 25% of kids don't even know who their grandparents are, barely know who their grandparents are, let alone their great-grandparents. So if you don't know the story that you come from, you're going to feel isolated.
That's so good and so true. So you've written multiple books with David Green, and for most of our listeners probably know that's the founder of Hobby Lobby. How did that friendship start?
So the short story is that after practicing law, we went and started a charitable foundation. So originally we were part of the National Christian Foundation. Later we created our own entity. But in the course of doing that, I happened to meet the oldest Green son, Mart Green, at an event. He was speaking, and we exchanged cards. And ultimately, he called me a couple months later and said, "Hey, I've got some questions. Can you help us with, how we do some of our giving?" So I did that. I came down and met with him. But ultimately, what happened is over time they came back and said, "Hey, we've got the giving stuff figured out, but we need some help with our family." And so that's really how I began to enter the equation. And that's really what's led to our work today with our ministry, Legacy Stone. Is so we just recognized that you'd see families that had good estate plans or good giving plans, but they didn't have a good plan for their family. They weren't intentional about what they were building with their family. So we came in and started working with the family, helped them develop a family vision, mission, and value statement. Now they've got it on, a whole statement. By the way, this is what we've done. So this is what we say to families is that you want to look at is you want to put together, this is our family, vision, mission, values. We have a code of conduct too, but this is on the wall of our home. This is Deuteronomy 6 idea is that then you want to be able to talk about it when you're going by the way, when you get up, when you're in the evening. That is how Jewish culture built their family. That's the whole idea. And they were very intentional about how they did that. So you taught the Shema, you told stories. But the law, by the way, the Old Testament 10 Commandments is really about the idea, love God, love people, talk about it all the time, because that's how we keep the family together.
Yeah, it's so good. Which comes back to, I think, why it is so important, the dinner table, and just what happens around that and how much of that has been lost with, both parents working and overcommitting and workaholics and just life in general, and we've lost so much of that.
Oh yeah, and anyway, that's the fun part of what happens is when you see families recapture that. We say that part of our ministry is to really help recapture the family table. So the conversations that take place around there are built around, frankly, very simple ideas of just storytelling, reminding ourselves of where we've come from, who God is. Just recently, I was reading in Micah, and Micah goes back, the prophet, and he's referring back to the time of the delivery from the Red Sea. Well, he's talking about something that happened 700 years before. That's how we need to think is, what did God do 1,000 years ago?
Yeah. So I'm reminded of the story in Joshua, and all the heroics that he did, and it took about one generation, and none of them, were serving God. It's like what an indictment, on how we flunked at that. And I think if we look at ourselves, it's like, wow, what kind of responsibility do we have to make sure that our grandkids, are serving God, are knowing Him and making Him known, are working to try to, make heaven full, to make this country a better place, this world a better place, and, all those different things. And Anyway,
Yeah, one of our hallmark verses that we refer people to, it's Psalm 78, verses 5 through 7. And when people hear the Psalms, they think of David. But Psalm 78 is actually written by Asaph. Asaph was the chief musician in David's court. Solomon's court probably lived to see the fall of Rehoboam. But in Psalm 78, Asaph, by the way, is probably looking at David's life and he's seeing this generational transition. David, of course, had the great heart for God. Solomon, mostly, until it got corrupted. And then he saw the fall. So 3 generations. But in Psalm 78, he writes and he says, these things, this thing about the testimony of God, the story of God, and the law, which is this code of conduct, the way of life, these things should be on your heart. And then our fathers should teach their children, who would teach their children, the children yet unborn, and the children still to come. 5 generations is what that passage talks about. And then verse 7 concludes that by saying, so that they would put their hope in God and not forget the commandments of God. So what we say to families and to certainly the audience that you're talking to is that you're probably far more intentional about your business life than you are with your family life. So you got to go do the same thing that you do in your business, which is build the culture of your family. That starts with vision, mission, values, code of conduct. This is the way that we live, and then have regular family meetings. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
But the families that are intentional about it, they can last 100 years. They can thrive for 100 years. That's what the research tells us. That's what the scriptures teach us.
That's so good. So if you had to summarize the legacy life in one sentence, what is it trying to help families do?
We want them to think long term. We think short term. We are thinking, 30 years of hard work, then retire and sit on a beach. And we're saying you need to think generations to come. That is God's mantle for us as believers, is to think about generations of influence and impact, because he wants us to think about that day in heaven and all the people that are gathered around because of our life, that we shared the gospel, that we were committed to a family that continued to have influence and impact for generations.
When you think about the book, is there one story in there? I know you've been telling some of these stories for years with David, but is there one story in that book that still moves you every time you tell it?
Well, one of the great stories in that is the story of the Rechabite family. This is in part 3 of the book. And it's a little known story, but in 2 Kings 10, the Rechabites first come on the scene. It's a bad time in the history of Israel. And ultimately, one of the Rechabites helps Jehu defeat Ahab and the reign of evil that he has. We don't find the Rechabites until Jeremiah chapter 35 again, and there's a whole band of them. And they walk in front of Jeremiah, and Jeremiah says, hey, here's some wine to drink. And they say, we don't drink wine. And they ask them, they say, why not? And they say, because our forefather, Jonadab, the son of Rechab, said, don't do this. Live this way, don't live this way. Well, that's a 250-year story that people don't think about. We find, by the way, the Rechabites are still in the book of Nehemiah, 400 years. And the history books, the commentators tell us that the Rechabites have continued on. The latest we find them is about 1862. So that's a couple thousand years of one family living out vision, mission, and values. And that's just one of the great stories. And that's, again, there's some great stories in the book of other families in history that are 1,000-year-old family. And that's stretching our imagination to say, let's think differently about family.
Yeah, for sure. I know when people tend to hear the word legacy, I think, a lot of people think, well, it's money, that's inheritance, that's stuff. And you said it's much more than that. So how do you define legacy?
Yeah, we talk about legacy is really about, if you want to simplify it, it's really about the virtues and values of the family. Sometimes we'll define it in terms of the 5 capitals of a family. So it's the intellectual, social, spiritual, emotional, and financial capital. It's far beyond just the financial, because frankly, if you gave your kids 4 forms of capital but not financial, they'll probably get financial capital. But if you only give them financial capital, they'll probably go bankrupt.
We can point to a lot of families where that's happened over and over again, obviously. And I know you study a lot about history. You bring a lot of historical families, their stories into the book. And research suggests that 70% of the wealth is gone by the second generation and 90% by the third. Why do you think that happens?
It's one of those things that when we start out in the early days of family, we are very interdependent. We need one another. So we got to scrap together, we got to work together. But as you gain financial wealth, you produce independence. And so you don't recreate the struggle of what it takes to get there. And so that's why we lose so much of it. So one of our what's the power of struggle? It's that we learn the values of hard work. We learn the values of dependence and interdependence, of faith, and all those kind of things. But once you gain some financial wealth, you lose a lot of that.
Yeah. Is there any certain patterns or blind spots that the families need to watch out for to avoid that same fate?
Well, the simple thing that people don't realize is that, I work with a lot of the business owners, and they come to me and they're like, I got to get my estate plan. I got to get my financial plan. And they just need to realize that's not where families fail. Where families fail is communication and trust issues. It's the communication of values, the communication of stories, but it's also how well we handle conflict. One of the workshops and small group set of materials that Legacy Stone has, the second series, is called How to Navigate Family Conflict. And so you got to have a code of conduct, and you got to have a process by which you handle your conflict.
I know you've said a lot about family stories are really the glue that kind of holds the identity of the family together. Can you explain why that storytelling is just so critical to legacy?
Storytelling really is the heart of family culture, because you can do a lot of things, but storytelling is the easiest way to pass on family values. So there's a classic story of a family that we know of that, they're not a great family of wealth per se, but when I think it was the great-great-grandfather, he was stepping down from his post as a minister, and they decided that they would hold a big celebration to honor him. Well, what they did at the celebration is they just started telling stories and doing music. It was all oral tradition, oral music, and they've continued that tradition for 103 years. That's the power of storytelling. People want to come in and gather, and they want to learn from those stories, because the stories hold the emotion, and when we feel that emotion, we want to come close, because we all want to belong to something.
Yeah, that's so true. If you had some advice you would give to families that maybe they're just beginning the journey of just thinking about legacy, maybe young families aren't even wealthy yet, but they want to be intentional, what kind of advice would you give them today? Yeah,
the best families, frankly, that we work with are the young families. So it's those families that have their vision, mission, values. We worked with a family that they're just getting started in their marriage, and they put together their vision, mission, values statement on the wall of their home, and they'll tell you that they argue better, they stick together better, they make decisions about their career. They don't have the financial wealth. They may never have the financial wealth of any single family, but they've got the glue around how they're going to architect their family for the next 40 years.
I know one of the things that I was intrigued by as I was reading your book is you and David both were talking about these family meetings. There was quarterlies, there was annual, there was all these different things. What does a healthy family meeting look like? What's a simple agenda that a listener could maybe try this month? Just give us insight to what that looks like.
The simplest agenda really just starts with family updates. Hey, what's going on? What are you doing? What's been happening in your personal life? What's been happening at work? One family, they use 5 questions, how, now, powwow. How are things going right now? What now is happening? What's most immediate? And then the POW is there anything hurting? Did something happen? And then, wow, what's great? But just a simple update. I've sat in meetings with families where we implement this, and they look, oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And so that little bit of update, we tend to assume people know, brings people together. And then it's, hey, what goals are we working on as a family? But then also, frankly, what kind of conflict issues are there? Is there something that happened that we need to talk about? Do we need to clear the air on something? They don't have to be big issues, but let's just address things that have happened.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So simple. You ask yourself why you're not doing some of those things. What about for the parents that are listening today, and maybe they got kids that are getting a little bit older, and they've realized, wow, I'm worried that my kids are becoming entitled. Are there 2 or 3 practices you'd recommend to help them kind of form that character around money?
Yeah, we do encourage the idea of a family wealth statement, but then we also encourage the idea of family giving. So the earlier you can start family giving together, that's one of the easiest places that we say that you've got to go after. Family giving really is the antidote. Sorry, I got to make sure I'm plugged in here so I don't run out of juice. But you got to address family giving. We see too many families that haven't done any giving together for forever. And it's the family giving that really does keep the family together. And we say it's the easiest conversation to have, even over family values, because most people will want to give together.
That's good.
Yeah.
Is the biggest mistakes, maybe misconceptions you see families are making when it comes to legacy? I mean, is there something repeating itself?
It's that we wait too late. So we think, someday, because life's busy, when you first start out. But that's the time to start. But then second, it's additionally is that you avoid conflict. We think conflict's bad, but conflict's just systemic. It's built in. And so it's the families that address their conflict and learn how to navigate it are the ones that stick together. And trust me, I'm by no means perfect in all this.
So you and David just released this book. I think it's your latest one, The Legacy Life.
It is.
What do you hope readers are going to take away from that book?
So underneath all that, Terry, we say that the number one thing that we have to do in the world today is reset the theology of family, or to reset family worldview. Your job is not to just raise up a bunch of independent individuals. Now, we're not saying your kids should be living in your basement by any means when they're 30. But we are saying that we want families to recognize that family's meant to be a team, and God has a call for each and every single family to work together, and even as adults, to say, what territory has God called us to occupy and to advance his kingdom together. And that idea of that togetherness, the family is the reflection of the local church. It is meant to be interdependent. We need one another. But I'm afraid what's happening in the world right now is the level of alienation inside of families is at an all-time high. Cornell did a study that said there's like 27% of families are experiencing some level of alienation. And some of this discussion around boundaries has been taken too far. I just read an article recently where it was a millennial that was writing, say, it's like, hey man, if your parents have made mistakes, it's okay if you cut them off. That's your choice. And man, you're gonna always be related to your parents, so work at that relationship. So anyway, that at the end of the day, we've got to reset how we're thinking about family, because it is the way that we change culture. It is the first institution that we have in the country, before government, before education, before arts, etc.
Yeah, if we're going to change anything in America, for those that are listening in the United States today, we're going to have more of an impact if we're starting it at our house than we are the White House. I think the White House just becomes an extension of how well or how bad we've done at our house. So that's definitely where it starts.
Yeah.
So if you could give our listeners maybe just one action that they could do this week to begin to just build meaningful legacy in their family, what would you suggest?
Simple word or simple question that we would say is gather around the dinner table and ask this question. What are the words that describe our family? So you don't even have to use the values question, but what are the words? And say, let's see if we can't come up with 5 or 6 words that would describe our family. Are we an adventurous family? Are we a family of faith? Are we a family that, loves outdoors? But the words that describe your family become that set of values. And then as you do that, build around that this idea that we're Team Smith or Team High. We are a team, and this is how we describe ourselves. So that simple thing of the mindset that, man, we need to be a team and we need to work together around this set of values.
That's so good. You got time for me to rapid fire some kind of Culture-neer questions at you?
Yeah, fire away.
One word that defined legacy for you, what would that be?
The one word, well, we say, it's the phrase. We usually say legacy is what you put in motion.
Okay. One daily practice that kind of keeps you grounded in this whole legacy living.
Journaling.
Yeah, something recently that I've just started doing, and I don't know why I put it off, thinking that I just wasn't a journaler till I started doing it. And I can only imagine looking back a decade from now.
Yeah.
One story from your family that you hope your grandchildren will remember?
Well, the funny story around our family is my great-grandfather, who I was named after. It's an important part of the family legacy, was a moonshiner, and a revenue agent came to collect tax on his still, and reportedly, my great-grandfather shot the guy's earlobe off. Didn't kill him, but
warned him.
I want them to remember that there's a part of this story of our family that is not this suburban, genteel kind of life, but there's a rough side of this that says we came from something that's very different, and to remind them of that kind of background.
Yeah, it's good. How does Bill want to be remembered when his time on earth is over?
I want people first and foremost to say that I love my wife really well, love my kids intensely, and that I set out about this whole idea of family to do it differently and to cause people to think differently.
Well, sir, I believe you've done a good job at that to this point, for sure. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Before we close, where can listeners learn more about your work, the resources? How can they connect with you in the legacy life?
Yeah, have them go to legacystone.com. They can find the book as well there, Legacy Life. There's a devotional too, 90-day devotional, but legacystone.com, that's where they can see our small group materials, on-demand curriculum and the like, and love to connect with them there.
That's awesome. Well, again, Bill, we appreciate having you on the show today. And folks, I want to encourage you, both of those books that Bill just recommended, I have read. I highly recommend those. I bought them for our entire leadership team to go through. I think there was that much value in a world full of books. It's not just about content or consuming content. It's about consuming the right content. And this can have a dramatic impact on your family, on your business, and obviously on your legacy. Remember, your culture is only as healthy as the leader. We'll see you next time on the Culture-neer podcast.
Thank you for joining us on Culture-neer, where every episode is a step forward on your leadership journey. We hope today's conversation sparked new insights and added real value to your life, empowering you to lead with greater strength and purpose. If you enjoyed what you heard, please connect with us. Follow our Facebook and Instagram pages, subscribe to our YouTube channel for exclusive content, and give us a rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your support helps us grow our community and continue delivering conversations that matter. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep striving, keep leading, and keep inspiring.